The question came to me in the simplest way, the way the real questions usually do, quietly, almost by accident. What does it feel like when the applause stops? Not the polite applause at the end of a school performance, not the warm clapping you get from people who know your name and your story. I mean the kind of applause that is loud enough to drown out your thoughts. The kind that makes you believe, for a moment, that you are being held by the world itself. I thought of that question one evening while watching a red carpet clip on a small screen. The sound turned low. There were cameras, bright lights, a crowd calling out names like prayers. People were smiling the way they smile when they feel close to something shiny and distant. In the middle of it all was Keanu Reeves, calm, polite, present, almost soft around the edges compared to the noise around him. He looked like someone who knew how to stand inside a storm without becoming it. And yet, what stayed with me wasn't the clip. It was what I imagined after it ended, the quiet hallway behind the curtain. The moment the tie loosens, the smile relaxes, the body remembers it is tired. The walk to a car, the ride home, the door closing. The sudden ordinary air of a room where nobody is cheering. Everyone sees the fame. Few people sit with the silence that follows it. I don't know Keanu Reeves personally, and this is not a story about private facts or hidden scenes. It is a reflective storytelling, one inspired by public moments and by what many of us recognize in ourselves, the gap between how we look from the outside and how we feel when we finally return to our own minds. Because fame is just a louder version of something most of us already live with. Most of us have our own small red carpets. A meeting where we need to perform confidence. A family gathering where we must look fine. A social media post that makes our life appear smooth and meaningful. A job title, a relationship status, a role we play well enough that others clap for it in their own way. And then, later, we sit alone. We wash dishes. We stare at the ceiling. We listen to the sound of the refrigerator. We feel the heaviness that applause never touches. That is where the real work happens. Keanu has often been described as unusually grounded for someone so widely recognized. People mention the subway rides, the quiet moments on benches, the way he seems to treat strangers with the same respect he gives directors and co-stars. These observations travel online like small proofs that humility can survive success. But beneath the surface of those anecdotes is something deeper and more human. The possibility that calm is not a personality trait. It is a decision, renewed daily, sometimes painfully. Because you don't become gentle simply because life has been gentle to you. Some people become gentle because life has been hard, and they learn that hardness doesn't heal anything. When I think about the emotional shape of a life like his, I don't imagine drama. I imagine accumulation. I imagine the slow layering of losses, disappointments, misunderstandings, quiet loneliness. Not the kind of suffering that makes headlines, but the kind that makes a person look at the world differently. The kind that teaches you that nothing, no amount of money, attention, or admiration, can bargain with grief. Grief has its own schedule. It doesn't care about your image. And maybe that is why the calm stands out. Not because it is effortless, but because it seems earned. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being visible. It sounds like a contradiction until you've tasted it. People feel they know you, but they only know a version. They greet you with expectations. They approach you with stories they've already written about you in their minds. They want a piece of your mood, your time, your face, your warmth. Even when they mean well, you can begin to feel like a public space rather than a person. For most of us, the loneliness is quieter, but it carries a similar shape. We feel seen for what we provide, not for what we are. We feel useful, not understood. We sense that our value is tied to our performance. That is the first trap, to believe your life must be proven. If you spend enough time in that trap, your inner world becomes a neglected room. You keep the front of the house clean for guests, but you stop visiting the back rooms where you actually live. And so, the mystery returns. What does it feel like when the applause stops? I think it feels like standing in a quiet place and realizing you don't know how to meet yourself without a role. At some point, whether you are famous or not, you begin to notice the difference between attention and care. Attention is bright and fast. It arrives easily and leaves easily. Care is slower. It requires patience. It shows up when there is nothing to gain. Attention can flatter your ego. Care repairs your nervous system. And the older you get, the more your body becomes honest about what it needs. It stops being impressed by what used to excite you. It begins to value sleep. It values a calm morning. It values one sincere friend more than 10 admirers. It values being able to breathe deeply without that tight feeling of chasing something. This is where the story, for me, begins to turn, not through some dramatic event, but through a quiet refusal. I imagine Keanu, after years of being watched, slowly choosing to be less watchable. Not in a bitter way, not as a protest, but as a gentle return to what is real. The subway becomes not a symbol, but a practice, a way to be among people without being above them. A bench becomes not a photo opportunity, but a way to rest like any other person rests. A book in his hands becomes not a performance of depth, but an ordinary conversation with his own mind. We often underestimate the power of ordinary choices. We think transformation must look like a grand announcement, but inner change rarely does. It looks like a person deciding to stop feeding what hurts them, even if it once felt exciting. To choose peace over applause is not to hate applause. It is to stop depending on it. That dependence is subtle. It doesn't always sound like vanity. Sometimes it sounds like ambition. Sometimes it sounds like responsibility. Sometimes it sounds like, I just want to make people proud. But beneath those phrases can be a quiet fear. If I stop doing, will I still be lovable? And if you live long enough, life will test that fear. It will take things you believed were permanent. It will humble your plans. It will show you that being praised doesn't prevent pain. It will show you that being admired doesn't guarantee being held. So you begin to build a different kind of strength. Not the strength of being impressive, but the strength of being steady. There are small habits people mention about Keanu that, to me, don't sound like celebrity trivia. They sound like emotional discipline. Arriving early. Respecting everyone on set, not just the important names. Listening more than speaking. Avoiding unnecessary luxury. Living modestly relative to what he could afford. These are not just nice traits. They are training. We train our minds the way some people train their bodies. Through repetition, through humility, through saying no to excess. Calm isn't something that drops from the sky. It is something you practice when you are tired, when you are tempted, when you are misunderstood. And the strange thing is, the quieter your life becomes on the outside, the louder your inner life can become, in a good way. You start hearing yourself again. You start noticing what you actually feel rather than what you are supposed to feel. You notice when you're hungry for validation. You notice when you're overworking to avoid sadness. You notice the ways you're trying to outrun your own grief. Then you can do something rare. You can stop running. Acceptance is not a glamorous word, but it is one of the most powerful skills a person can develop. Not resignation, acceptance. The kind that says, this happened. I wish it didn't, but I will not let it poison every corner of my life. That kind of acceptance doesn't erase loss. It makes room for it without letting it rule everything. If Keanu's public presence has taught people anything, It is that you can carry sadness and still be kind. You can feel pain and still show up gently. You can know how fragile life is and still treat it with respect. That is a quiet philosophy. Grief is not an excuse to harden. Another name comes to mind alongside his, not because their lives are the same, but because the lesson rhymes in a different key. Emma Watson has been in the public eye since she was very young. She has experienced that particular kind of growing up where your awkward stages are not private, where your mistakes are not allowed to be normal, where people project ideals onto you before you have even chosen your own. There is a pressure that comes with being seen as a good example. It can turn your identity into a job. It can make you feel you must always be articulate, always be correct, always be worthy of the image others love. And eventually, it can create a fatigue deeper than physical tiredness, the fatigue of constantly being interpreted. In recent years, she has stepped back at times, choosing quietness over constant visibility. People debate these choices as if a person must always explain why they want less noise. But the desire for peace doesn't need a dramatic justification. Sometimes the soul simply says, "Enough." Stepping back is also a kind of courage. In a world that rewards constant output, rest can feel like rebellion. Privacy can feel like selfishness. But sometimes privacy is how you remember who you are when nobody is watching. When I think of Emma in this reflective frame, I don't think of fame. I think of boundaries. I think of the slow learning that you do not owe the world every version of yourself. I think of the quiet wisdom of choosing what kind of attention you allow, and what kind you refuse. Because attention is not neutral. It shapes you. If you let the public define you for too long, you can forget how to define yourself. So the deeper story here is not famous people being humble. The deeper story is about any person choosing an inner home over an outer stage. Keanu and Emma, two different lives, two different temperaments, can be seen as mirrors for a single human question. What is the point of being admired if you are not at peace? The world often teaches us to chase the external signals: applause, likes, promotions, praise, status. We learn to measure our worth by response. But the inner life doesn't speak in numbers. It speaks in sensations. It speaks in quiet dread or quiet contentment. It speaks in the way you feel on a Sunday evening. It speaks in whether you can be alone without needing to distract yourself from your own thoughts. Inner peace is not a constant state of happiness. It is something more modest and more stable, the feeling that you are not at war with yourself. You don't need perfect circumstances for that. You need honesty. You need self-respect. You need the willingness to let go of what is harming you, even if it is glamorous. And here is the part that doesn't get celebrated enough. Choosing peace can look boring. It can look like going home early instead of staying out to be seen. It can look like not replying to every comment. It can look like turning down opportunities that would impress people but drain you. It can look like eating simply, sleeping on time, walking without headphones, reading instead of scrolling, saying a sincere thank you to someone who expected nothing from you. It can look like arriving early, not to be praised for professionalism, but because you don't want to bring chaos into a room. It can look like treating the least powerful person with dignity, not because you want to be admired for it, but because you know what it feels like to be overlooked. It can look like owning less and feeling more. And it can look like kindness when no one is watching, the rarest kind, because it doesn't get rewarded. There is a temptation in modern life to curate ourselves into something consistently impressive. But real growth often moves in the opposite direction. It makes you simpler. It makes you more direct. It makes you less interested in winning and more interested in living. A quiet life is not an empty life. It is a life where you can hear what matters. I've noticed this in my own small ways. The more I chased approval, the more I felt a strange hollowness after I received it. The compliment would land, and for a moment I would feel lifted. Then, almost immediately, the old anxiety would return, because the compliment didn't change who I was inside. It just changed the lighting. And lighting is not warmth. Warmth comes from steadiness, from relationships that don't require performance, from work you respect even when nobody praises it, from knowing what you believe and living like you believe it. That is what I imagine this story offering, gently, without insisting. The idea that inner peace is not a luxury for the lucky. It is a practice for the willing. Of course, our lives have constraints. Bills must be paid. Responsibilities must be met. Not everyone can step back in the same way. But there is still a choice available to almost all of us. We can stop making our self-worth dependent on noise. We can choose one small act of simplicity. We can choose one habit that makes the mind quieter: walking, journaling, prayer, stretching, reading, cooking, sitting with a cup of tea without multitasking. We can choose one boundary that protects our energy. We can choose one act of kindness that doesn't get posted. We can also choose to accept what cannot be fixed and still move forward with gentleness. That is what makes the lesson universal. It is not about being Keanu Reeves or Emma Watson. It is about recognizing that every human being has an inner world that gets neglected when the outer world becomes too loud. And the most beautiful thing about choosing inner peace is that it doesn't need permission. It doesn't require the world to understand your decision. It doesn't require an audience. It doesn't even require that you feel peaceful immediately. You simply begin to live in a way that points toward peace, the way a compass points north even before you arrive. So when I return to that opening question, what does it feel like when the applause stops? I think the answer depends on what you've built inside yourself. If your whole identity is made of applause, silence will feel like a collapse. But if you've built something quieter, values, discipline, kindness, acceptance, then silence becomes a place you can rest. A place where you are not reduced to a role. A place where you can grieve without being watched. A place where you can smile without needing a reason that makes sense to anyone else. In that sense, the goal isn't to escape the world. The goal is to stop needing the world to prove you are real. And maybe that is the softest kind of freedom. To be able to walk away from the spotlight, not with bitterness, not with superiority, but with a calm gratitude, and to return to your own life like it is enough. Because it is. And because, in the end, the deepest applause is not the sound outside you. It is the quiet feeling inside you that says, I can live with myself. I can meet my own eyes in the mirror. I can be kind. I can keep going. I can own less and feel more. The screen fades, the crowd disperses, the noise becomes memory. What remains is a person, breathing in a quiet room, finally hearing their own heart again, and realizing that this, too, is success.